I grew up with my grandma and lived with her most of my life, and her house always freaked me out because weird things happened. It's not like the house was old. No one had ever lived there previously, and it wasn't the typical scary house that you think of when you think of a haunted house. I guess I have my theories, but that's for another time, I suppose. Anyways, everyone in my family who stayed there has their own stories of things that they've seen or heard, including myself. Some examples of what I experienced were hearing footsteps outside my door in the middle of the night, hearing someone in the master bathroom walking around and turning the sink on when I was the only one home. When I was young, I was sneaking downstairs to grab a snack and turned the corner to go downstairs and saw a little girl sitting on the big box that we had at the bottom of the stairs, seeing figures of people on the walls moving around. Honestly, the list goes on. These things happened throughout my life and were spaced out occurrences, so I tried to just ignore it all the best that I could. But what I experienced when my grandma was dying were some of the most intense things that I have ever witnessed. So my grandma had breast cancer, and eventually it spread throughout her body and she lost the battle. They put her on hospice, and we set up her living room for her to stay in so we could take care of her. The last week of her life is when things started getting just really weird. For instance, I would be sitting on the couch next to her bed and see people in the corner of my eye walking past the doorway in the hallway, even when it was just me and her in the house. And when other people were there, they saw it too. There were times where she would be looking up to the ceiling or at the walls and smile like she was looking at someone that she knew. Another time, my whole family was on the couch just being with her, and the light in the room went out, and my grandma smiled and said, "It'll come back on." And right when she said that, it did. Now, while these occurrences were starting to happen frequently, it was just little things like that. But then, the last few days of her life, she started declining more, so we bought a baby monitor with a camera to watch her when we weren't in the room to make sure that she didn't try and leave the bed or something. She kept trying to do things on her own and would fall. Well, one night my sister and I were upstairs in her bedroom talking, and we looked at the monitor screen and I instantly started crying from what I saw. It's hard to describe what we saw, but the only thing that comes close to what it looked like was a mix of a sort of a gremlin and golem. It felt so off though. We watched it almost crawl or jump onto her bed. She was asleep, but it seemed like she knew it was there because she made a movement with her hand like she was hitting it away, and once she did that, it left. My sister went downstairs to check on her. She was still sleeping and nothing was there. It was one of the creepiest and weirdest things that I've ever seen in my life, and even after 6 years, just the thought of it makes the hair on my arm stand up, and my eyes begin to tear up too. It's not just because of how scary it looked, but because of the way it made me feel, I guess. Even through the monitor, you could almost like feel its presence, and you could feel that it was not good, whatever it was. The next night, my sister and I were back up in her bedroom watching a movie, and my sister looked at the monitor and studied it for a second and told me to take a look at it, which, after what I had already witnessed, I was terrified to even look, but I did, and clear as day, you could see a head behind my grandma, which looked like she looked at the time, sort of bold and sick and etc. So we took a picture of the monitor screen this time, and we zoomed in to see what it was. We noticed above that head was my uncle's face. You could see his features and could easily recognize it was him if you knew him. He was my grandma's son, who died a few years back from cancer as well. While I don't really believe in God and am not sure where I stand on the afterlife, even after all my experiences, it was a feeling of relief, I guess, seeing this after the horror I saw the night before. Almost like him saying, "It's okay, I've got her." I have no idea what the head was behind her. My sister thinks it could be her starting to leave her body. It did look like it was her, just watching her body laying there. A couple of days later, she passed away too. For the next month, we stayed there to pack up her house and sell it, and while there were some weird occurrences from time to time, that was pretty normal for the house, and it seemed like all the insanity and the activity that occurred while she was dying had left with her. But I'll never forget the things that I saw in that house during that time, and even as I'm sharing all of this, I have goosebumps. I do have the picture that we took of the monitor. It's a pretty unsettling photo and shows my grandma too, so I'm not sure if I'll post it unless I'm able to cover her for the sake of my own family. But anyway, thanks for listening, and yeah, it was a crazy time. This story is from 2019. I was 13 years old at the time, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. Maybe it's due to trauma. I don't know. I was bored at home alone. I FaceTimed my best friend, who lives in the apartment building next to mine, and asked him if he would join me in a walk around the neighborhood. He wasn't there. He was on his way back home from school, which is understandable because it was a Thursday afternoon. There is a jogging circuit near my house. It's like 500 meters away. But due to my massive boredom, I put on my sports clothes, a basic t-shirt plus some shorts. The shorts have no pockets, and this is an important detail. I then was headed with my music vibing to the circuit. Arriving there, it was surprisingly not that empty, around maybe 8 to 10 people in that 15-kilometer circuit. I started walking for a bit, then ran for a couple of kilometers and laid down in the grass. Now, I noticed two guys on a motorcycle going back and forth. I didn't care that much since I was sort of FaceTiming my two best friends anyway. It was getting pretty late. It was around 6 p.m. I guess, and I was exhausted. I walked home, but I took another path that is kind of like a shortcut, I guess. I had to walk through an empty big street with buildings and construction. I took that same path many times before with no problems. But I had a feeling that someone was watching me and following me. So I turned around and noticed the same two guys on their motorcycle heading toward me. I sort of whispered to my friends on FaceTime that something weird is going to happen and that they have to cut their mics and focus with me. The guys came by and one of them asked me where the nearest barbershop was. Out of stress, I gave them a random location. While the rider of the bike asked about the barbershop, my right eye twitched and unfocused a bit. It always does this when I'm heavily stressed, but I was still able to see with it. And I saw in the bike's rearview mirror that the other guy was trying to look at where my phone is. It was between my short and my belly because I had no pockets and I had my earphones on. I immediately freaked out though. Time was starting to slow down. Seconds felt like hours and I could no longer feel my legs. The day went on, but with a slow speed, it was sort of like they were planning a backup plan or something. In any case, I had three options. There was a taxi guy fixing his car. I could have went to him and explained the situation, but my gut said, what if they noticed me and came back and maybe they do what they planned to do anyway? 2, I could stop at a random car and hop in with them and explain the situation. My gut said no, because what if the car was locked? Plus, the guys would have noticed that I knew what they were planning to do, and they would have come to me after the random car would go. Or 3, and this is what I chose, run in the opposite direction into the traffic and take the path that I came by. I instinctively ran for a straight 5 minutes, eventually couldn't do it anymore, and I entered a field and started running again towards some slums. I looked back and I saw the guys coming up after me into the field, and one of them was shouting, just stop, we just want to know where the barbershop is. There's this one thing about me though, and it's that I always trust my gut, and it said, no, run as fast as you can, or you're about to die today. And that's what I did. I ran between the slums and kept running until I arrived near my best friend's house, who I was still in FaceTime with. I told him to come down the stairs right now, and I laid down in the parking lot. He came and was freaked out because he knew that something was happening but didn't know what since I hadn't given him all the information yet. My face turned yellowish and I threw up. I couldn't feel my legs nor my arms anymore. He walked me into the house and I laid down, and from that moment, to be honest, I don't remember much more. I just remember sort of waking up the following day with bruises on my legs due to me running into the field full of spikes and stuff. And that was it. The whole story happened in the space of maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And now, these days, I take that same path again with no worries, but man, I stayed off that path for quite some time after this. So I was adopted into my current family about 5 years ago, that being February of 2017. My family had a nice house where my siblings and we all had our own room. There was also a basement, which at the time was a game room for all of us and was the biggest room in the house. Eventually, my 2 older brothers moved out during the second year of me living there. When they did, my sister and I decided to switch rooms. I got her room and she got the basement room. During those 2-ish years, my sister complained about numerous nightmares, I guess you could call them, and claimed to have seen dark shadows at night, as well as hearing the boiler room and storage room door open. Me and my parents would just sort of laugh at the claims and would say that it was because of how late she would stay up and all those energy drinks that she had. To be honest though, I really wish that I hadn't laughed. This past December of 2021, my sister moved out due to her graduating early, and my parents renovated the basement room where I then moved into. I was genuinely excited to have my own space downstairs too. It was about the size of a smaller studio apartment, I guess, with enough closet space and a bathroom with a walk-in shower, and on my first night in the basement, it was so messy due to moving everything downstairs that I stayed up past midnight organizing everything, just wanting to get it done, basically. And sure enough, I heard the basement door open. I thought that it was my mum at first, so I naturally joked around and said, "Isn't it past your bedtime?" I called this out. I opened the bedroom door, looked up the stairs to see the door was just wide open. I was kind of confused, but shook it off and just closed it. I went back downstairs and closed the bedroom door. I eventually finished and went to bed. In the morning, I asked my mum if she went down there during the night, and she denied it. She claimed it was just me being tired, so I shook it off. I didn't experience anything for a few days too. But then, I came home from school one evening. I was home alone and came home to all of the basement doors open, as well as the door to the basement. We do have cats that weren't allowed downstairs, so I worried that they may have gotten into things. My mum never forgets to close the door too because of that, so I immediately thought that someone may have broken in. But our front and back doors were all locked still, and I come in through the garage. I ran to check and I saw our cat in the boiler room. She was in the far corner and I could hear her hissing at something. I swear on my biological parents too that that boiler room door swung closed. It's hard to shut too due to the wood door frame being somewhat uneven, and that was what really confused me. Me, trying to be brave now, I went into the corner, grabbed my cat, and I opened the door. I shut the remaining doors and went back upstairs, where I found my mum just coming home. "What are you doing with the cat?" she asked me. "Did you leave a bunch of doors open?" I asked her. "No, I haven't been home since like 8 o'clock, and I haven't needed to go down there. Why?" I told her about what happened, and she mentioned how maybe my brothers stopped by and pulled a prank on me or something. But neither of us could explain the door swinging closed. That night, I couldn't fall asleep too. I began to get all paranoid and started to overthink the situation from earlier. And then it hit me. I remembered the things that my sister complained about when she lived in the basement. The next morning, I brought it up to my mum, and she looked somewhat concerned, I guess. She never believed in the paranormal stuff, but I did. I'm pretty sure that this convinced her, though. And after this, it just kept happening. The boiler room door would open mostly, but from time to time, my bedroom door and the storage room door would open too. Lights going crazy on and off happened a few times as well. I had my one and only incident of sleep paralysis too, where I thought that I saw a tall shadow in the bathroom doorway. And it was around this time that I decided to ask for help. My friend's mum was a medium, and I asked her if she could come to look and step into the basement to see. She agreed and came over one night. It was back in April. She said that she was drawn into the boiler room immediately too. She claimed that the energy was dark in the boiler room, specifically, and that there was some type of spirit and perhaps an entity that was trying to find peace and was just angry. She suggested that we get the house blessed by a professional, so my mum and I appreciated the help and she left. My parents, they knew the house's history too, and we were all confused. To this day, now late May of 2022, these events still occur despite having the house blessed 2 times, but the activity has slowed down somewhat. I honestly believe that my sister's collectible antiques may have gotten attached to the house, but I'm not sure. She had a few creepy sort of like clown dolls and old frames for aesthetic purposes back in high school, but then again, those items aren't in our house anymore. I don't know. I'll take any tips if you have them, but thanks for listening. This happened to me during the summer of 2017. I'm a girl and I was 19 during the events. So, I'm going to try and stay a bit vague regarding the details, like the country of happening, the origins of the people, the name of the places, because I don't want to be recognized or cause bad reputation to any community. Now, I was living in an apartment with my family. On the parking lot, there were always several guys repairing cars. I used to come back late home pretty often and see these guys just talking and sometimes saying to me good evening, and one time I got as a joke, "We kept you a spot," nothing inappropriate. I would always just answer politely and take it as a gesture of goodwill. I had noticed that one of them had tuned up a sedan and must be living in the same building as me, but a different entrance, because in the morning the car was parked there. It was really recognizable. One morning I was going to my work and I realized that this car is parked next to mine. And well, he doesn't live far, so it's not that weird, I guess. But when I got into my car and I sat in there, I realized the owner is actually seated in his car and looking at me and sort of smiling at me. Well, okay, it's 8:30 a.m. I mean, why not? I start to drive to get to my work, and I'm in the special roundabout where you have to sort of stop inside if a car on the right is coming, which is the case, so I'm stopped there. I'm looking at the right to see when I can go, and realize that in the second lane, the car is there. As soon as I take the road for work, he's behind me. Even when we get real close, he's still there. I was working in a mall with the biggest hypermarket of the neighborhood, so I thought maybe he was just going for groceries or something. I get into the underground parking lot and I park, and he does the same right next to me. I chose to ignore him and go for the escalator, and well, you can probably guess what happened. Yep, he does the same and starts to talk to me. "Hey, I'm Steve, and you?" "Oh, I'm Anna. How old are you?" "I'm 19. I'm 27. Is that a problem?" No. Why would it be?" "Oh, okay, so you work here?" We arrived at the place where I worked. "Yeah? Okay, well, I'll see you tonight then." Bye." So at this moment, I realized that he's not really speaking the language well. I answered the questions because He didn't seem scary and, well, I didn't want to make a scene. When he said bye, I thought, yeah, I guess I will see him every night in my parking lot with his friends, so that's normal, right? But back when I finished work, the exact same thing that in the morning happened. While I sat in my car, I realized the guy was right next to me. Since I was surprised and he seemed really eager to talk to me, I got out and was like, "What are you doing here?" "Oh, I have something for you," showing me a big smile. "What? No." And he gave me a red rose. Embarrassed and a bit shocked. It was the first flower that someone had ever given me, by the way. I refused it a couple of times, but he kept on insisting. I knew the only way that I could get rid of him would be to accept it, which I did, and he left. I kept the flower in my car so my family didn't realize something is happening, and I threw it in a trash can outside later. So, this was the beginning of the week, and he started to wait for me after work to give me drinks, to ask me out for a cinema date. I actually said to this, "But you don't speak the language well enough." "You'll teach me," he said. Or sometimes he invited me to a restaurant. Obviously, I refused everything, but ended up accepting the drinks to make him leave. On the weekend, I had a second job as well. I had these late shifts in fast food. It was my first shift there since everything happened, and I was closing the restaurant with 3 other colleagues. Since it's pretty dark and late, there was a rule that one of us had to leave first and drive around the restaurant to make sure it was safe for everyone. I wouldn't do that normally, but this night I had a really weird feeling that he might be here. So I volunteered for the drive and, well, right on the spot, he was parked next to my car. It was 1 a.m. And I mean, how long was he waiting there for? I told him to go a bit further, otherwise we can't leave, which he did. After my colleagues left, I stopped next to his car and opened the window, just to explain to him why I reacted like that. Not that I had to explain myself, but I thought that maybe he'd follow me until I explain. And before I knew it, he opened his car door and then got into my car. I just want to remind you that this man knew where I worked, where I lived, what my car looked like, and even who my family was. And it was a neighbor. That's why I never wanted to make a scene, I guess, but at this very moment, I was pretty scared for my life, I guess. A 27-year-old muscular guy that I didn't know was in my car at 1 a.m. in an empty parking lot. He seemed, I don't know, talkative, and I didn't have any other choice, so I decided to listen to him and learn stuff about him too. He said that he arrived in the country in 2014 at the capital, stayed there 2 years, and in 2017 he got in our neighborhood. I did the maths and realized that there was a whole year missing. I asked, and he answered, "Oh, I was in jail." You can probably imagine just how scared I was upon hearing that. "Why were you in jail?" "Well, I didn't have papers and I had a car accident." Okay, it wasn't that scary in the end, which reassured me. The guy said goodnight and he left. There were many times when I checked the inside mirror and would see that he was right behind me. I obviously wouldn't know every time that he was there, but even to this day, I check really often to see if a car is following me. Once, I was washing the dishes during a late shift. I had my phone and was texting friends, 2 guys, to let them know when I was finished and that we could meet. Well, I was working, so I had to leave my phone. Maybe half an hour later, a colleague comes to me and says, "Hey, your friend ordered at the drive-thru and asked for you, and he said that he wanted to meet you later." I took my phone and said, "So you came by? Were you alone? What are you talking about?" At this moment, I rushed to my colleague and asked her to describe the guy in the car, and as you can guess, it was Steve. Now, I won't bore you with all the rest of the details, but there were so many cases of things like this happening. He followed me to my friends, threatened to reveal stuff about a friend to his dad that he knew. Also, one of his friends, Carl, who I spotted on my parking lot, had followed me a couple of times too. A friend who knew Carl was told that he was married, had kids and was like 40, and I was really shocked by that. One evening though, around 10 p.m. maybe, and it was already dark, I parked and saw a friend or a neighbor getting home. It had been a while, so we talked a bit. He said that he'll be back in 2, so we can chat. And while waiting, I'm getting my stuff in the trunk. This is when the car parked behind me flashes its lights at me. I didn't have to turn around to guess who it was. I'd been patient since nothing too crazy had happened, and I didn't want to scare or create problems for my family, but this night I was pretty angry, and it was happening right next to my place. So I threw my stuff down and I rushed at the car. Both Steve and Carl were there, and I told them to leave, to stop following me. Steve didn't say a word, and Carl just sort of smiled and said goodnight. I didn't answer and left. Well, it must have worked because they didn't bother me for months. Steve changed his car and now had a black one, which was still a really recognizable car. He followed me a few more times, and one day he even tried to talk with me with a friend that could translate well what he was saying. I explained to his friend that I just wasn't interested and that it was the last time that I talked to him. However, months later, I see in my neighborhood this kid that I knew from sports, and I knew that he lived in an apartment at about the same place as Steve. The whole thing was over, but it was always in the back of my head. I didn't really know who the guy was and didn't know if this would start again. I was curious though, and you know how curiosity is a bad thing, I guess. I started to talk to him. I was like, "Hey, do you know this guy," giving a physical trait, "that lives in your building?" "Oh yeah, this guy." And he gives a description. No, the guy who owns the black car." "Oh, you mean my dad?" I froze. I have no idea how this conversation ended, since it's still a huge shock even to this day. I know that I didn't tell him anything about his dad's behavior though. I knew this kid for so many years, and he was actually the son of this guy, and apparently he had 3 or 4 brothers and sisters too. Then I realized that the guy had totally lied about his age because this kid was like 15, and I believed him like an idiot. But this is not the end of the stunning discoveries that I made. You see, a few days after, I meet a friend who knows about these events and tell her that the kid, that she knows too, is his son. She looked at me sort of shocked and she said, "All this time it was this guy? What, you know him? He left his country because he stole money from powerful people and joined his family here, but got into jail for suspicion of terrorism or something." And I mean, what the heck, right? And I remember that when he followed me, he would actually stop when I would arrive in the direction of the police station. I just thought it was because he still had issues with his papers or something. She kept talking and showed me a video. This is his wife here, and the second woman is his second wife. She was apparently so tired of him talking to other girls that she went to their country to find a second wife for him. I want to be precise here and tell you that my friend had come from the same country as this guy, but she was born here. That's why she had this kind of information, I guess. Small community. It was a small community, so they kind of know. It was a small community, so they kind of all know each other. So, in the end, I think that I was very lucky that nothing actually happened to me. I still find it hard to believe that it actually happened the way that it did. I wonder sometimes how it would have gone if I had acted differently. But that's a thought that I try to keep out of my head, because dwelling on these things is pretty terrifying. So I moved to Canyon Lake, Texas in my junior year of high school. My family's house was built from the ground up on the south side of the lake. My parents didn't know that this was the side of the lake that most people avoided. I don't mean to be offensive, but most of the people that I knew lived on the north side, and I never understood why until, well, the events started happening. You see, the house was finished in the summer going into my junior year, and when we officially moved in, things were great. A few months into me beginning school is when things turned incredibly dark, though. It all began when my dad put his guitar in our family room by the fireplace. I would come home and something would string the guitar strings so violently that it sounded as if somebody knocked it over. I began waking up to my dad being completely weirded out because all of our cabinets and doors on the first floor would be open. It escalated drastically from here, too. We would hear something in the woods just outside of the porch lights continually. First, we thought it was an injured animal, but dead deer and other wildlife would appear on our property every few weeks. Then, we began to see unhuman things. Guests would see something walking in the hallways, opening drawers, and would see a girl in our guest house. My dad was constantly hosting events and parties, including his ex-military friends. They would ask us why we were coming to their rooms at night and opening the drawers and closets and then walking out. My dad didn't believe me until his friends began commenting on figures or people in the house. But the worst night was when all the doors began opening and slamming, and it sounded as if someone was walking up and down the stairs and going into every room, opening and closing the doors over and over again. I could honestly go on and on about the things that I saw in that house too. It was genuinely one of the scariest times in my life. I'm happy to answer any and all questions, but all in all, do not go to Canyon Lake, Texas.